It was a quiet day at the X-Mansion when all of a sudden Charles Xavier looked out the rear of his mansion and saw a shadow from behind. The shadowy figure was a man in a suit, and he had some kind of gun under his arm. The shadowy figure stopped, and Charles looked down as its muzzle went from his head to the ground. Charles reached out with his telekinesis to grab the gun and ran away. The shadowy figure ran back behind Charles, and before it could grab him again, they both stood still. Sting, standing next to Xavier, asked quietly to his colleague, "Who is that, and what's going on?" Sonic, in his uniform, said, "That's Xavier's son, Charles." "What the hell are you thinking?" Xavier angrily shouted. The suit man, shocked from the sudden appearance of two POP, looked confused at Charles, and said, "What was that?" "Charles Xavier's son," Sonic said in amazement. "My son?" Charles exclaimed. "And he's a mutant?" Charles shook his head. "No, he's not a mutant. A super-powered mutant." That's incredible," Sonic said. "I never knew this." "Charles, who are you?" The question came from Emma, Charles's daughter. Charles looked over at his daughter. "My daughter. Emma, this is Charles Xavier. Is there a problem?" "If there is a problem, I'll tell you it." Emma nodded seriously. "Is there a problem?" "Yes," Emma said. "Sonic Sensei is asking about who Xavier's son is." She continued. "He's asking if he and you are related." Charles gasped as he realized his daughter had the key to the X-Men's deepest secrets. He looked at Sonic, not knowing what to do. "Sonic Sensei, you really want to do this?" Harry asked, looking past the other man, as he thought on his plan that wouldn't be a bad idea anyway. Harry was Sonic's pupil and also a good friend to Charles's son and Emma. Charles was known as Charles the Hedgehog, although he referred to himself as Sonic the Hedgehog when they were younger. His father and mother were the founders of Project X before she had become pregnant with the son. "If it were me, I'd keep it all a secret from everyone," Sonic replied, with a smile. "It'd be too easy to find out who else's child is involved. I want you to help me take over the children's lives. Help them feel as comfortable as possible, and teach them good things." "Oh, I'll help you out, thank you," Harry replied. He was sure they would be able to figure out what he wanted for themselves, and to help their children feel happy. They left the building for the park again, and headed to an arcade called the Playground, the first place they had ever been. They stopped at the booth that had an arcade game called Battlezone. As the game began, Sonic and Harry looked at each other and then at the screen, then back at the screen. "Well," said Harry, "that's a really nice game, you know." Then they looked at each other again and said, "Well." They looked at each other, then at each other and said, "You haven't actually done anything, have you?" Then they looked at each other again and said, "Well." They looked at each other, then at each other and said, "Well." They looked at each other, then at each other and said, "It certainly looks like a great game and it looks really neat, but it must have some sort of error in it." Then in the last half-second of play, the game froze and it played out again. It started to shake and shake, it started to thicken and thicken, it turned blue and then it played out again as far as anybody could see and then it played out again as if nothing had happened. If anybody had heard, they must have thought it was some sort of bug, but nobody ever saw it coming. Meanwhile, Emma and Charles Xavier were looking for evidence on how to control a new telepathic attack. They needed to prove its existence before they could proceed with an experiment to see if an anti-telepathic attack would work, as the attack has happened before to Emma, her partner, and Charles himself. Soon Emma had been captured by Magneto. He had set the X-Men loose on the human-controlled savage land in Africa. Emma escaped and Emma and Charles were about to start a second war when Magneto was shot and nearly killed by Colossus. Magneto was taken back to his base, where Magneto's mutant DNA was used to produce a monster. Emma took a bullet as her mind was affected. Charles was forced to use a gun and try and save Magneto. The X-Men's leader, Jean Grey, was forced to take the opportunity to kill both Charles and Emma in a surprise attack. With Emma and Charles dead, Sonic and Harry were left to fend for themselves in the post-Earth 24001 city and were later rescued by the newly formed Avengers. Sonic was later seen on a plane in Egypt attempting to save a woman from drowning when the plane had to land. Harry, meanwhile, went to his room, still lying and trying to fall asleep. At 3 he started to feel a little better and went straight to bed. "Harry, you know, I told you not to spend all your time there. You know what you're going to do." Harry sat up and looked around the living room, looking back on the table, on the bookshelves, on the furniture. "What do you mean?" "Well," and he laughed. "You know, Harry, the Dursleys aren't bad ones." Harry's heart was racing, his mouth was open in terror. "Are you trying to say that you think you're better off than me?" No, I mean, you're really awful too, aren't you?" "No, never say just." "I don't think so." "No, that's not right." "You know what I mean." "You mean I've always been better looking than you?"